You're listening to an Auckland Libraries podcast.
For heritage to have value, for heritage to matter, you have to have a community there that celebrates it and connects to it. At the end of the day, these things, although they're from the past, they're kind of living and they're carried through to the present and then on to the future, hopefully, if we do our jobs right.
Welcome to the Heritage Talks podcast, bringing you the best in family and local history from New Zealand, the Pacific and beyond. Your heritage now.
Today's presentation is brought to you by Dr Elizabeth Nichol. During the 1880s, the Auckland Society of Arts held a competition for the best original compositions by New Zealand composers. Here Dr Nichol discusses the lives of the musicians and their work, as well as other compositions from the time.
So, the seed for this talk emerged while I was doing some research on early New Zealand published music. And while scouring the various newspapers and papers past, I came across mention of a song which had been advertised as having won the first prize at the recent competition held by the Auckland Society of Arts. A quick detour led to the discovery that for 3 years, the Auckland Society of Arts held a competition for local amateur musicians to compose original songs and piano pieces. These amateur composers included some with quite remarkable lives, and alongside them, a number of professional or semi-professional musicians and music teachers in Auckland were also writing pieces in the popular musical idioms at the time. A quick reminder of the nature of Auckland in the 1880s. So the population of the whole province was little more than 100,000. The borough of Auckland consisted of about 17,000 people, with a further 4,000 in Parnell, 3,500 in Onehunga, and less than 1,000 in each of Howick, Devonport, Panmure and Otago. Smith & Coe's opened its doors in 1880, the BNZ building had 2 new wings added, and the Occidental Hotel was built. Horse-drawn trams were introduced in 1885. And for the first part of the decade, Auckland was a thriving business centre with a very active port. The beautiful lithograph that was used in the publicity for this talk came from a copy in the Sir George Grey Special Collections of the programmes for the Auckland Society of Arts, an important and active society in the cultural heritage of Auckland. A society of artists had already been formed in Auckland in the late 1860s, but by the 1870s was struggling for membership. When the Society of Arts was formed in 1880, its primary object was to promote art culture and to encourage the production and disposal of works of arts by exhibition. Its interests were broader than the earlier society, covering not only painting, but drawing, sculpture, architecture, modelling, art needlework, wood carving, photography, waxwork, and leatherwork. The initial committee consisted of John Logan Campbell as president, 11 vice presidents, including Bishop Cowie, Sir Maurice O'Rourke, Judge Fenton, the Reverend Dr Arthur Purchase, Mr Buddle and Mr Dargaville. There were a further 10 committee members with Alban Martin treasurer and Neil Heath secretary. It held its first exhibition in March 1881 at the Auckland Museum building, but for later exhibitions moved to Coral Hall in Simon Street because of the greater display space. 3,600 people turned up to the first exhibition, rising to 6,500 a mere 2 years later. Art competitions included a very broad range of categories. Prizes, while either monetary, ranging from £5 for the first place to £1 for third, or for some categories a silver or bronze medal was awarded, designed by the leading engraver Anton Schutenberg. The image on the screen is from a little later, 1903, and was awarded for the first prize in colour to Frederick Porter. Music did feature in some of the early exhibitions, but only as incidental entertainment. You can see here that the 1881 exhibition notice mentions that some music would be played in the evening. At the 1883 exhibition, the governor opened the exhibition, and during the evening, the Orchestral Society performed under Herr Gustav Schmidt with Major Eccles on the flute. Mr. Impey's band played selections on the Saturday. In late 1883, the idea of holding a music competition as part of the programme was raised with the committee, and in early March 1884, a notice was published calling for entries as part of the 4th exhibition, to be held in late April. As you can see, entries were open to amateurs only, and with a medal for the first prize winner and a certificate for the second and third prizes. So at this point, I'd like to say a word or two about Carl Schmidt, who with Benton proposed the establishment of the music competitions and sponsored the silver medal. Carl Schmidt was born in Frankfurt am Main in Germany in 1837. His father was a music teacher, composer and pianist, and other members of the family were also professional musicians. Schmidt studied with his father and also in Paris, and developed skills as a violinist, conductor and composer. He immigrated when he was 22, seeking, as many others had, a climate that was more beneficial to his health. Arriving in Auckland in early 1859, he gave concerts, taught violin, piano, singing, French and German. Schmidt's sister Antonia, who was a pianist, had married the explorer and founder of the Canterbury Museum, Julius Haast. Haast had come to New Zealand in 1858, and it's quite possible that he encouraged his brother-in-law to join them. However, Schmidt stayed barely a year before moving to Tasmania. Brief periods in Melbourne and Sydney occurred before a return to Tasmania, where he was appointed as aide-de-camp and musical director to the governor, Sir Frederick Weld. In 1881, Judge Fenton, who was chairman of the Auckland Choral Society as well as being a founding member of the Auckland Society of Arts, invited Schmidt to take up the position of conductor at the Auckland Choral Society. This Schmidt did, also taking on positions as music master at the Ladies' College Remuera and in 1884 conductor of the Auckland Amateur Opera Club. It's possible that Schmidt's proposal to sponsor the competition was one means of raising his profile and further establishing himself in Auckland musical circles. In 1888, Schmidt was somewhat controversially appointed as Professor of Music at the 5-year-old Auckland University College. Some queried the need for the position and noted that Schmidt didn't have a degree, that is, he didn't have a degree from a British university. His salary was only £100 per annum, significantly lower than the other professors, and the position was downgraded to that of lecturer the following year and remained somewhat precarious. 1888 was also the year he was naturalised. He was held in high regard as a conductor and composer, but his ill health returned and he died in Clevedon in 1900. Schmidt was also an active composer. He received a number of European honours, but unfortunately few of his works have survived. The music for the national anthem of Tonga is by Schmidt. He wrote a large-scale cantata, Art and Mind, which was performed in Auckland in 1888. It was written for the opening of the new Auckland Art Gallery, but in the event that performance didn't take place. He also wrote a number of works either for the piano or arranged for the piano, and these included the Petit Morceau de Salon, dedicated to a Miss Green of Ballarat, and the Choral March, dedicated to Lady Weld. Both these were sold in Auckland through the Auckland Music Warehouse, owned by Arthur Eadie. When I was planning this talk, I was hoping to have William Green here with me, playing on the wonderful grand piano and the whare wananga at the Auckland Central Library. However, events have not made that possible. Plan B, which was to have William pre-record the pieces, also ran into difficulty, although he has very kindly provided an example using a keyboard he had access to, and my sincere thanks to him. The other examples you will hear today may be considered fairly authentic performances in that they're being performed by an amateur in a domestic setting, so they do come with some imperfections. But I still thought it would be good for you to get a flavour of the pieces. So here is the opening section of Schmidt's Choral March. Now, back to the Auckland Society of Arts music competition. In the newspaper notice, you may recall that it advertised that the competition would be judged by George Tyndall, recently appointed as Professor of Music at the Canterbury University College. In fact, due to some practical communications issues, Judge Fenton also took on the role as adjudicator, and a telegram received on the day of the announcements fortunately showed that the judges agreed on the prize winners. 12 entries were received, submitted to the judges using pseudonyms. The newspapers included the full set of comments by the judges for each entry. Tyndall reflected on the high standard overall, writing, "I must express my great surprise that Auckland could produce so much original good music." Prize winners were announced at the opening, and there was an opportunity in a later evening session for the prize winners or their nominees to perform the pieces. First prize medal was awarded to Thomas Wood for his composition of a piano sonata. The son of Rita Wood, a prominent lawyer in Auckland, Thomas had studied for the law in England before returning to Auckland. His interest in music continued even as his legal career advanced. In 1884, he also gave a lecture on Beethoven, was for a time the Honorary Secretary of the Auckland Orchestral Society, and in the 1890s acted as an examiner in music for the Auckland University College. He returned to live in England around the turn of the century. Judge Fenton was so taken with the piece that even at the 1886 competition, he remarked that he thought it was unlikely he would ever see such an accomplished entry as Wood's sonata again. Tyndall commented that it was a long way ahead of any of the other entries, and there was evidence of much study and considerable natural gifts. Although Wood did enter some of the later competitions, he didn't manage to repeat his first prize-winning effort. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find a picture of Thomas Wood, but the picture to the side is of HF or Frank Edgar, who won the second prize with his song. Tyndall described it as an excellent composition, written with great care, although he did note that several sections were very reminiscent of other songs. Frank Edgar was already known in Auckland musical circles. He had accompanied his sister when she went to London to study at the Royal Academy of Music and used that time to advance his studies on the cello. He performed in orchestras, chamber groups, or as a soloist or accompanist, sometimes adding a cello obbligato at a song recital, was organist and choirmaster at All Saints Ponsonby and secretary of the Ponsonby Choral Society. And yes, he was the son of the Reverend Samuel Edgar of the Albert Landers settlers and elder brother to Kate and Lillian, who both went on to have noteworthy academic careers. Frank went on to have a successful legal career, becoming a judge of the Native Law Court until his death in 1909. The third prize went to a Whitehorne for his Triumphal March, praised by Tyndall as a fine, manly composition with some beautiful modulations. Alan Whitehorne is to feature again in the competitions, and I'll speak more of his life in a few moments. It doesn't seem to have been much discussion either for or against a music competition being run by the Auckland Society of Arts. As I mentioned earlier, music as entertainment was a regular part of the conversaciones, but wasn't part of the artistic range of activities usually considered by the Society. The friendship between Fenton and Schmidt would certainly have helped, and the competition no doubt helped keep Schmidt in the eye of those who may have been influential in the establishment of the music professorship at Auckland University College. In 1885, a second music competition was held. On this occasion, Schmidt provided 2 medals, one for a song and one for a piano piece, and the number of entries increased. This put into effect a recommendation from the judges the previous year who had commented on how difficult it was to judge between a sonata and a song. Both sections were won by Alan Whitehorne, and the winning song, Come Stella Come, was included in the May 1885 issue of the New Zealand Farmer, Bee and Poultry Journal. Alan Whitehorne had one of those lives which would have been criticised as being too fanciful if written for fiction. Alan Anderson Whitehorne was born in Scotland in 1842, but spent much of his childhood in Jamaica, where his father was a plantation manager. Sent to England for his education, he qualified as a civil engineer, returned to Jamaica, and then worked for a short time in British Guiana before relocating to England sometime before 1877. He then decided, for reasons unknown, to try his luck in New Zealand. He arrived in 1878, at 36 years of age, and set up business in Auckland. He seems to have been quite successful, and music was clearly a strong personal interest as he entered the competition each of the 3 years it was held. He also composed other works, including the Hurry Scurry Polka and a vocal duet, The Splendour Falls on Castle Walls. However, all didn't appear to be well on the family front. His wife was 15 years younger than he and ran away from boarding school in order to marry him. While they were both living in Mount Eden, it was noted that they took to drink and, quote, they never attained to any great social status, unquote. After a few years living in Auckland, they moved to Sydney, but the couple separated and Whitehorne relocated to Queensland. Shortly after, in 1889, the murder of Mrs. Maria Whitehorne was reported. Maria Whitehorne had lost a position as a governess due to drink and had just been released from prison for vagrancy before her death. Whitehorne's wanderings didn't end there. 2 years later, he joined the Nova Australia movement, a movement born out of the industrial unrest in Queensland in 1890 and 91. This was a group of people who decided to move to Paraguay in search of a better life. Whitehorne was part of the second group of settlers who sailed on the Royal Tower in 1893 and is probably somewhere in this picture of the settlers, but I have absolutely no idea which one he is. All still didn't go quite as planned, and the movement split, with some staying in the original settlement and others setting up a new base. Whitehorne appears to have remained there until his death. And even that isn't quite the end of the Whitehorne story. In the centenary history of the Auckland Society of Arts, there's mentioned that in 1938, a silver medal owned by Whitehorne arrived in Auckland addressed to the Conservatory of Music. Since there was no such organisation, the Customs Department decided to return it to its issuing organisation. When I read this, I became quite excited and rushed off to the Auckland Museum to consult the Auckland Society of Arts papers that are there, but couldn't find any mention of the medal. Looking online, there are lots of examples of the arts competition medals held at both the Auckland Museum and Papa, but no sign of the music medal. In March, early March this year, I thought I'd have one more hunt and wrote to the collection manager at the Auckland Museum. You can imagine my delight when she replied that yes, they did have the medals, they just hadn't put the image up on their website yet. So what you're seeing now is Alan Whitehorne's 1886 Auckland Society of Arts music medal for part song, designed by Anton Schutenberg. So now let's hear some music by Alan Whitehorne. This is part of his prize waltz, which was published in Auckland in 1885 by Brett and Company. It was advertised for sale at Arthur Eadie's, and the original copy that this has been played from is in the Kerr Taylor collection at Alberton. You'll notice that on the cover there is a symbol in the middle which bears stunning resemblance to the medal design. So here is a little bit of Alan Whitehorne's prize waltz. There was only one more year of music competitions. In 1886, Mrs. J. McCosh Clark offered to provide a third medal for the part song, although in the program it was described as being donated by a lady member of the society. So the classes in the competition were a song of not less than 2 verses, a piano piece of not less than 4 pages, and a part song. Alan Whitehorne again won the prize with his solo song, Our Cruel Maid, and the part song class. The judge was impressed with the writing of his solo song, saying, "It's a real song and appears to me better in all respects than many that are written and published by people who have made a name for themselves. It is perfect all through." Frank Edgar received the second prize in both categories. Whitehorne stood aside and asked that the medal for the solo song be awarded to Edgar, since he had already won one. And Miss Belle Hitchings won the prize for the piano work. So at this point, I'd like to introduce you to Miss Belle Hitchings. Belle Hitchings had already had some success at the competition, having won a special certificate in 1885. Isabella Mary Hitchings was born in 1862 and raised in Napier, the eldest daughter of Dr. Thomas Hitchings and his wife Mary. The family had settled in Napier in the 1850s. She and her sisters seem to have been very active in Hawke's Bay society, and I was fascinated to discover that Bella's sister Hilda became the New Zealand champion tennis player in 1895, despite having the use of only one arm. You can actually still buy online a print of a 1904 illustration of Miss Hilda Hitchings' one-armed tennis player for £21. But back to Bella. She was clearly drawn to music and the stage from an early age, performing in some local concerts, such as the fundraising concert for the Catholic Church Organ Fund, and was a member of the Napier Operatic Society and Dramatic Club. Shortly after the competitions, she, with her three sisters, travelled to London, where she took elocution lessons with the Shakespearean actor Ben Greet and adopted the stage name of Belle Napier. She and her sister Hilda later relocated to Britain permanently. Belle continued her career on the stage with various theatre companies, specialising in musical recitations and musical monologues, and returning regularly to New Zealand for performance tours and visits. She died in London on the 3rd of December 1951. Unfortunately, the scores for the pieces that she submitted to the Auckland Society of Arts competition don't seem to have survived. But in 1882, her Valse Brilliant Daphne was published in Melbourne. It's in the form of a Viennese waltz, which means there are a number of short, thematically connected sections, which you'll hear in this recording. notice that there seem to be a few names appearing each year as prize winners. From the 12 entries in 1884, interest grew in 85, but reduced down to 10 in 1886. But remember that the competition was limited to amateur composers, and many musicians in Auckland who had received formal training were excluded. These other musicians were certainly composing music, and in some cases the works were published for domestic use or for performance at the very many amateur concerts which were a regular feature of the city's entertainment. Similarly, throughout the length of New Zealand, both amateur and professional musicians produced songs and dances in the popular musical styles of the period. Between the years 1884 and 86, some of these included George Brett's The MATAURA Valley Polka. Brett was an accountant and commission agent in Gore, who was also pianist and organist and performed in many Gore concerts in the 1880s and 1890s. The Old Flag was by George West, a Dunedin music retailer and publisher, and one of the leading figures in Dunedin's music circles. Robert Crosby's All Hail Zealandia. Crosby was a railways department employee and an enthusiastic amateur musician from Christchurch. His All Hail Zealandia was one of the many attempts at a national song for New Zealand. The Akaroa Waltz was one of several pieces by Hayden Flood. Flood left a post at one of the leading Bristol churches to come to New Zealand in the 1860s. He lived in many towns in both the South and North Islands, teaching, accompanying visiting artists, and filling the role of church organist. He struggled to make a secure living and was declared bankrupt twice, as well as being brought before the court for failing to provide for his wife and children. From Hamilton, there was the music teacher R.H. Holloway. On the back of the music to this Tanakaway Gallop, there's a notice for an entire volume of works by Holloway, which was planned to be published, but no copies have been found yet. And also from Christchurch was John Pooley. John Pooley was a machinist at the Addington workshop, but also a prolific composer. He wrote an opera, Hadrian's Daughters, and a cantata, Jonah, and numerous songs and piano pieces, such as On the Avon. And as a final example, Come Away by Woodley Squire. Squire wrote another piano piece called Upstream, which was dedicated to the boating clubs of Whanganui. But I haven't been able to find anything about Mr. Squire anyway, and it's possible these pieces were published under a pseudonym. In Auckland itself, there were also a number of musicians who tried their hand at composing short pieces for the local musical audience. The music teacher, Samuel Adams, wrote this song under the name Dasma, and it was popular enough for several editions to be published. Various church musicians wrote works, including Philip Hiscox and Angelo Forrest. Martin Swallow was a flamboyant music teacher, pianist, organist, and composer. And in a letter to one of his pupils, Wilhelmina Ratchins, Martin Swallow wrote that he much preferred performing over the tedium of teaching, even though it meant many hours travelling to reach such outlying towns as Ponsonby, Mount Albert, and Mount Onehunga. But it wasn't possible to make a living by performance alone. Some things have not changed. One of the leading musical figures in Auckland at this time was William Henry Webb. Webb had just arrived in Auckland in 1883 and became manager of the London and Berlin Piano Company. As an incentive to prospective purchasers, he included in the sale a free copy of one of his songs. After a few years, he gave up the retail trade and with his daughter Madeline Wilcox, concentrated on his school of music. The music room featured a grand piano, upright piano, and at least one harmonium. As playing orchestral works arranged for between 4 and 16 hands was a normal part of teaching and performance practice at the time. Webb wrote a book on learning the piano, which was published in London and received considerable critical success. You may have noticed that the words to the Dasma song and one of Webb's were by the Otahu poet W.R. Wills. Wills trained as a bootmaker, but after moving from Onehunga to Otahuhu, became more involved in local government. He was a prolific poet, and many of his poems were set to music by Auckland musicians. He also wrote poems for special occasions, such as this one for the laying of the stone for the new public library and art gallery. In April 1886, at about the same time as the Auckland Society of Arts exhibition, there was another civic event of some importance. To celebrate the 74th birthday of Sir George Grey, a volume of addresses was compiled and signed. The volume is in the Sir George Grey collection of this library and includes this beautiful illuminated first page. The volume was presented to Sir George at a formal ceremony, and part of the program included some musical items. One of these was the performance of the Kawau March by Alfred Pooley, performed by the Auckland Artillery Volunteers Band under the baton of the composer. Alfred Pooley was another who had arrived in Auckland in 1883 and was involved in numerous musical activities. One of these was the establishment of some summer afternoon marine concerts. Passengers would embark the steamer Takapuna at the wharf. The boat would then cruise via Northcote to Lucas Creek, moor for a while, enjoying some musical entertainment and the possibility of fishing, and then be delivered back to the starting point in time for connecting trains. Unfortunately, Pooley arrived just as Auckland's economy started to feel the real effects of the Depression, and shortly after being declared bankrupt, he left for Sydney. A further musical item was the performance of a specially composed birthday ode. The words were again by W.R. Wills, and the music on this occasion by James Philpott. Yet another 1883 arrival, Philpott went on to become one of Auckland's leading music teachers and was an organist at St Matthew's Church for almost 30 years. He undertook some non-degree studies at Auckland University College and won the Onslow Medal in 1891 for the best music student. He wrote many pieces for solo voice, choirs and piano solo over the years, several of which were published, but many not. And if anyone has any knowledge of the whereabouts of any Philpott manuscripts or any of his descendants, please let me know. I'd be really interested to find out. This birthday ode is an early work, and this is what it sounds like. The reception of the birthday ode was mixed. The poetry was condemned by one writer who wrote, "I have read a birthday ode written by a local rhymester and dedicated to Sir George Grey. It has been set to music by a local composer. I shall not read it again. Life is too short to be wasted over such stuff." In the event, the newspaper reported that the ode was prettily sung, and at its conclusion, the performers were loudly applauded. 1886 was the final year of the Auckland Society of Arts music competitions. Whether Schmidt became too busy with his other musical activities, or the cost of donating the medals was more than he was able to continue, we don't know. There's nothing written that I've been able to find that explains why they stopped. Maybe Fenton and Schmidt believed that by 1886, they had gone a long way to achieving one of their original purposes, namely the ultimate establishment of a professor's chair of music in the city. Whatever the case, looking at the competitions along with the compositions by other musicians in the colony gives us a brief insight into the multitude of musical activities the citizens of Auckland had available for their entertainment, and a chance to learn something of the lives of those who are part of Auckland's musical heritage. I'd just like to finish now with bringing to your attention a website that I'm curating along with Dr Claire Gleeson in Wellington. And if you found the story of these early musicians interesting, you might like to have a browse through the biographical snapshots of some of the other people working as musicians or in the music trade in New Zealand from 1840 to 1920. And I've got my contact email at the bottom there, but I can also be contacted through the website. Kia ora, thank you very much.
You've been listening to an Auckland Libraries podcast. Stay tuned for more Heritage Talks. You can find further information on our page at SoundCloud or see the Auckland Libraries website.